Hello friends, so let us continue our discussion on understanding the response of a material to an imposed mechanical conditions. So far in all the previous lectures, we have been attempting to quantify the mechanical condition that we impose on the material and the mechanical condition that the material experiences within it and the response of the material. So for that, we used theoretical concepts like stress, strain, and in these we consider components of stress to express the mechanical condition experienced by the material within it, and we consider different definitions of stress and strain. We consider true stress and strain and engineering stress and strain. So all these descriptions were largely theoretical in nature. So we wanted to quantify or express the mechanical condition that we impose on a material through a definite set of parameters that were independent of the dimension of the material, and therefore they can be used universally. And similarly, we want to have a parameter to quantify the response of a material in such a way that it does not depend on the initial dimension, or rather the dimensions of the sample. So all these discussions were largely on the theoretical realm. So we did not consider what were the changes that each of these strain or stress would render into the system. Even though we termed it as elastic and plastic, we did not actually see how it would change the material principally. So from this lecture onwards, we will be looking into what are the effects of these conditions on the material. Instead of a theoretical construct, we will be looking into what is an actual or what is the physical effect of these conditions on a material. So this we will be largely looking at in the atomistic scale. So we are now moving from the theoretical realm to a physical realm. We want to see how the mechanical condition that we have been so far quantifying, we have been so far discussing, be it the original mechanical conditions like we discussed in terms of sigma 1, sigma 2 and sigma 3, be it these mechanical conditions that we externally impose, or the components of these stresses, so sigma x, sigma y and sigma x, and all the rest of the shear components. We want to see what are the effects of these different forms of stresses in the material physically. So for that, we will be looking or focusing on one particular scale, one particular length scale, and that is the atomistic scale. So all our discussion from this lecture onwards will be focused on how the stress influences the material, or what response would a stress bring on the material in the atomistic scale. When you talk about the atomistic scale, we largely focus on the arrangement of the atoms. So in the atomistic scale, we focus on the arrangement of the atoms. So we want to see what effects the mechanical conditions that we have so far been considering would have on the arrangement of the atoms, that is in the atomistic scale. Now, based on the arrangements of the atom, the solid state materials, be it any material in its solid state, can be categorized into crystalline material and non-crystalline material. Of course, these concepts would have you would have come across this already. You would have learned a lot about this already. Maybe it is possible that you know these concepts more than me, but since these concepts are important, they have a huge relevance for the subsequent discussion. Allow me to visit these concepts which you would have come across in your courses on physical metallurgy. Since there is a significant amount of understanding the crystal structure and what you are subsequently going to study on the response of the mechanical condition on the arrangement of the atoms, let me revisit the concepts that you have already come across. So like I said, we want to talk about the effect of stresses or the mechanical condition in the atomistic scale. We want to see how a material responds to an imposed condition in the atomistic scale. So when we talk about atomistic scale, we want to see the effect in terms of the arrangements of the atoms. Now, based on the arrangement of the atoms, the solid state materials that we see can be categorized into crystalline material and the non-crystalline material. Now, what characterizes the crystalline material is the regular arrangement of the atoms. You have the regular arrangement of the atoms, particularly in the long range. So, you have the regular arrangement of the atoms over a long range, over a larger distance. So, this long range is a relative term. It's a relative term, and this is with respect to the atomistic distance. So, the long range is a relative term, and this is with respect to the atomistic distance. So, when you consider the distance between two atomistic planes, so two crystal planes, and with respect to this distance between the two crystal planes, when you have a long range or you consider a larger distance, and over this distance you have regular arrangements of the atoms, and then if you have a regular arrangement of the atoms over this larger distance or longer distance with respect to that of the interatomic spacing or interlamellar spacing, then your material can be referred to as the crystalline material. So, crystalline material is characterized by regular arrangement of the atoms over a long range, and this long range is not, say, order of meters or order of kilometers. No, the long range is with respect to the interatomic spacing and interplanar spacing. So, the distance between the two planes of the atoms or distance between each of the atoms. So, with respect to these distances, when you have a long range, that is when you have a range that is very much bigger than that of these interatomic distances, and over this range you have a regular arrangement of the atoms, then you have a crystalline arrangement. So, a crystalline solid state material. Now, the contrast to this is the non-crystalline material. So, here you might have a regular arrangement or repeatable arrangements of the atoms, which you might refer to as the regular arrangement of the atom or orderly arrangements of the atoms, but they are rather confined within a given atomic distances. So, they do not exhibit a regular or orderly arrangements of the atoms over a long range. So, that is the differentiating factor between crystalline material and a non-crystalline material. In crystalline material, in both these materials, when you consider locally within few atomic distances, few atomic spacings, you might find some regularity. However, only in the crystalline material you have regular arrangements of the atom over a very long range, and that is what characterizes the crystalline material. Now, when you have a regular arrangement of the atom over a very long distance or a very long range, then it is identified that this regular arrangement of the atoms can be represented by a simple three-dimensional structure. So, this regular arrangement of the atoms over a very long range can be represented by a simple three-dimensional structure, and this structure is referred to as the unit cell. So, what this unit cell is? So, unit cell is the miniature representation of the regular arrangements of the atom over a very long range in the crystalline material. So, you have a very long range of regular arrangement of the atoms. So, you want to have a representative setup that shows how the materials are, how the atoms are arranged, and that representative setup or that representative illustration is what we refer to as the unit cell. So, this unit cell in most cases is in the form of a three-dimensional cube or cuboid. In most cases, this unit cell is represented in the form of a three-dimensional cube or cuboid. So, if we focus our attention on cubic crystals, then the unit cell would look something like this. So, your unit cell would look something like this. So, what this unit cell means is that, and in this unit cell, you have a definite points wherein the atoms might take their positions. So, in this unit cells, there might be definite positions wherein the atoms might take their positions, and these points are called as lattice points. So, there are positions wherein the atom might assume in the arrangement, and these points are called as lattice points. Now, the unit cell, what it means is that when you arrange this unit cell over a very long range, you will ultimately end up with the arrangement of the material. So supposing if you have a definite arrangement of the atoms and you are able to represent that arrangement of the atoms in the unit cell, and now once you have the unit cell, when you are able to arrange this unit cell over a very long range, you will ultimately end up with the atomic energy, atomic arrangement of the overall material. So the ad infinitum of the unit cell will ultimately yield you the atomic arrangement of the material. So this atomic arrangement of the material in the crystalline system is referred to as the crystal structure. And what we are essentially doing is we are representing the crystal structure in the unit cell. So the atomic arrangements of the atoms in a long range, when they are regular, it presents a crystal structure, and this crystal structure can be represented by a simpler unit cell. And in this unit cell, when you place the atoms in their exact positions where they occupy, and when you keep on repeating this unit cell in all the possible directions, you will ultimately end up with the atomic arrangements in a given material. So now we know for a crystalline material there is a definite crystal structure, and this crystal structure can be represented by the unit cell. And this unit cell, when you repeat it in all the possible directions over in the long range, you will ultimately end up having the atomic arrangements of that material. So now, in order to describe the unit cell, we need certain dimensions. So let me draw the same unit cell in a longer range, in a longer scale rather. So in order to describe the unit cell, we need certain dimensions. So first of the requirement for describing the unit cell is the frame of reference. So let us stick to the frame of reference that we use for calculating the different components of stresses. So we had our x-axis in this direction, y-axis in this direction, and z-axis in this direction. So let us just stick to it. Now if you draw the unit cell in this frame of reference, you will end up something like this. So this would be your unit cell. And now we need to have definite dimension in order to describe the unit cell, and these are one of the dimensions. So these are longitudinal dimensions. So you have a dimension in the z-axis, you have a dimensions in the y-axis, you have a dimension in the x-axis. So these are the dimensions of the unit cell, and these, depending on the relation between these dimensions, say supposing along the x you have E, along the y you have B, and along the z you have C. So depending on the relation between these unit cells, they can be equal, they can be not equal. So you have different crystal systems. So these again you might have already been familiar with. So just to give you, or just to reintroduce you to it. So the unit cell, you can define the unit cell based on different dimensions. One of the dimension is the length along the different frames of reference, and those dimensions, or the longitudinal or linear dimensions, can be referred to as based on the axis as A, B and C. Depending on the relations between these dimensions, you can define different crystal systems. Maybe you can have just go back and look at what these different crystal systems are, and how in the different crystal system these dimensions or the dimensions of the unit cells are specified. Now in addition to these longitudinal dimensions or linear dimensions, you also have the angular dimensions that talks about the angle between these two different axes. So these two different frames of reference. So you have alpha, beta and gamma. Let's just assume like that. So you have, in addition to having a length or a longitudinal dimension, you also have an angular dimension that describes your unit cell. Now again, in different crystal systems, these angular dimensions also vary, and you are of course welcome to have a look at what these crystal systems are. However, for our current discussion, we will largely be sticking to the cubic systems, cubic crystal systems. I do not want to venture into the other crystal systems as of now. However, when required, we will look into it, but for this present discussion, we will be sticking to the cubic crystal systems. So that means all the dimensions, both longitudinal and also rather the lengthwise dimension and also the angular dimensions, are equal. So in the cubic crystal systems, it is characterized by the equality in the lengthwise dimension and also in the angular dimension, and on top of it all these angles are 90 degrees. So this is what characterizes the cubic system, which we will largely be focusing on this lecture and the one after this. We might sometimes get into the hexagonal structure as well. So whenever we come across that or whenever we are talking about that, I will tell you how the unit cell in that particular structure would vary. So we are not much interested on talking about the different crystal structures, different crystal systems, but we are largely focused on the cubic crystal system, and sometimes we will move or discuss about the hexagonal coarse pack structures, and one of the different, which is different from the cubic crystal system. And when we face that, we will talk about the corresponding unit cell of that crystal structure. So we will not be getting into all the different forms of the crystal systems and how they are characterized based on the lengthwise dimension of the unit cell and the angular dimension of the unit cell. So we will be focusing on the unit cell wherein the lengthwise dimensions are equal and the angular dimensions are equal, and they are equal to 90 degrees. So this should be gamma, pardon me. Yeah. So now once we have this unit cell, we want to know how we can specify the different points in the unit cell, different planes in the unit cell and different directions in the unit cell, because our intention is to see how the mechanical condition that we impose on the material is going to affect the atomic arrangements. So we have considered the unit cell because it represents the atomic arrangements, and now when we want to talk about the effect of the condition that we impose on the atomic arrangements, then we want to specify which atom is moving with respect to which atom. So atom along which plane is moving with respect to the other atoms, and in which direction the load is imposing. So all these we want to describe within this unit cell. So therefore it is important for us to understand how we can express the points, direction and plane within the unit cell. So if you could recollect, the stress that we impose on a material, within the material it would vary based on the plane and the direction. So that is what the whole discussion on the components of stress was all about. We dissociated the mechanical condition that we impose on a material into different components, and these components, they vary based on the direction of the loading and also the plane. And now when we want to talk about this effect, which has a direction and which has its influence based on the direction and plane on the atomic arrangement, then we have to consider the ways to express the direction and plane within the unit cell, and that is what we are going to do now. So to begin with, let us see how we can describe a specific point in a unit cell. So again, let me allow me to draw a bigger sketch of the unit cell. Again, we will be sticking to the cubic unit cell. So this would be our frames of reference, and this is mutually perpendicular, again because we are sticking to the cubic crystal system. Maybe I will write it here. We are sticking to a cubic crystal system, and therefore the angles here are equal and 90 degrees. So your unit cell will look something like this. Now if you want to talk about a specific point within this unit cell, it is quite straightforward. We have a lengthwise dimension of each of these axes. So we have the lengthwise dimension of each of these sides or corners. So we refer to that as the dimension of the unit cell. There are 3 dimensions of the unit cell, and for cubic systems these are equal. So we have A, can assume it to be A and A. In some literatures or in some books, they refer to A is equal to 1 because after all we are considering the unit cell, but to maintain the generality, we will assume that these sides or these lengths are equal, these dimensions of the unit cells are equal, and this is equal to A. And now you have a coordinate system that is mutually perpendicular, and you have a length A. Now any point within this unit cell and on this unit cell can be then expressed like you express a point in the coordinate system. So if you have a point here then you have this point is away from the origin along the y-axis by a, and from along the x-axis by a as well, and from along the z-axis it is away by a as well. So ultimately this point is represented by a comma a comma a. So this is just a way to represent a point. Now supposing you have a point here, so it is lying on the z-axis, and let us assume that this is right in between the end of the unit cell and the origin. So it means here the distance between the origin and this is a by 2. So let me use a different color. So the distance between origin and this point is a by 2, and this point lies in the z-axis. So we don't have any role for the x and the y-axis. So the point is represented by 0, 0, a by 2. So these are the ways you can just represent a point. So representing a point is quite straightforward. All you have to do is treat the three axes as the coordinate system, like we can reasonably do, and we have to point the coordinate that corresponds to that point, and for that you see how far away is the point from our frames of reference. So if you consider the point here, it was or the a units away from that of the origin along the y-axis, a units away from the origin along the x-axis, and a unit away from the origin along the z-axis. In the same way, you can also consider the negative quadrant as well, and you can calculate or you can represent or describe the positions of any point. Now you can describe the position of this point here. This along the x-axis, the only possible term would be, or only non-zero term would be along the x-axis. So the same can be done for a point here. So these points will fall on another unit cell, but just for the sake of the argument, to show how the points are being described, I'm just giving you an example. So it is possible for us to extrapolate these frames of references into its negative quadrants as well, and then you can correspondingly treat that as a regular coordinate system and then express the given point in this frame of reference or a given point in the unit cell. Now it is important for us to note that all these notations that describe the unit cell or the points in a unit cell should be based on that of the dimensions of the unit cell that we have prescribed. So we have assumed that the dimension of the unit cell is a, and all the points that we want to describe should be with respect to this dimension. It should be expressed based on this dimension. And since we have a cubic system, we have a single independent or a single dimension of the unit cell. If not, we would have three different dimensions of the unit cell. So this is how we describe a point. So this is rather straightforward. Now we will see how to describe a plane. Again, these might be well known to you, and I can see some of you might be very well versed in this, but the reason I'm revisiting it is because it has a huge relevance to understand how stress would bring about a change in a particular plane. So for us to discern that more clearly, it is important for us to revisit our previous understanding of expressing a plane, a point, and a direction within the unit cell. Now we have seen that a point can be represented by treating the frames of reference as the coordinate system, and largely the only important condition that you need to impose is that we have to talk in terms of the dimensions of the unit cell, not in terms of any random number. We have to talk in terms of the dimensions of the unit cell, and it is always best to bring about a smallest way to represent, to remove all the factors and do some factorial and represent the points in a smallest product of the integers. So having talked about how to express the points, let us move on trying to describe the planes. So we begin with a coordinate system with x, y, and z, and in this coordinate system, which are mutually perpendicular because we are considering a cubic system, we have a unit cell with the equal dimensions, and the angular dimensions are also equal, and they are equal to 90 degrees. So this is mutually perpendicular frames of reference and equal unit cell dimension, so ultimately what you have is a cube. So now we want to define or have a universal way or a very general way of representing a plane within this unit cell. So the steps that are usually taken to have a generalized representation of the unit cell, a generalized description of the unit cell, is first by considering or by identifying. So we have to identify few things. So first we begin by identifying the intercept this plane that we are interested in makes with the frames of reference. So in order to represent a plane within the unit cell in a generalized manner, we have to first consider the intercept or where the plane meets the frames of reference that we are considered. So these frames of reference are also sometimes referred to as the principal axis. So frames of reference, if you consider the frame of reference as a more of a general term, in case of unit cell or more specific to the unit cell, you can refer to these frames as principal axis. Now when you want to calculate or when you want to describe a given plane, the first you begin by considering the points where the plane that you are interested in meets the frame of reference or the principal axis. Now once you have identified the point where the plane that you are interested in meets the frame of reference or the principal axis, then you take the reciprocal of it. You take the reciprocal of the point where the interested plane meets the frame of reference or the principal axis. So you identify the point and you take the reciprocal of this. Now you try to make the reciprocal as simple as possible by factorization. You try to get rid of factorization. Yep. So you will try to get rid of all the fractions by multiplying and dividing, also all those algebraic sort of things, and you try to have a definite set of integers that represent a given plane. So let us see an example. Now let us focus on a simple plane which is here. So this plane here that is highlighted in blue meets the frame of reference or the principal axis only in this point here. So this point here we have based on in the previous section we saw how we can quantify or describe a specific point within the unit cell, and if you go along those discussion, this point here would be 0 because it doesn't this point lies entirely on the y-axis, so it doesn't have any contribution from the x-axis, and it exactly lies in or on the unit cell, and the dimension of the unit cell is a, so it will be a, and it also again doesn't have any contribution or movement with respect to the z-axis, so this will also be 0. So this point here is 0, a, 0. Now what you want to do is we want to take, according to our description, the reciprocal of it. If you take the reciprocal of it, it will be 1 by 0, 1 by a, and 1 by 0. So ultimately 1 by 0 is nothing but infinity, and you have 1 by a and 1 by a. Now this is the point where your plane meets with the y-axis, and we want to see where your plane meets with the x-axis and where your plane meets with the z-axis. So far what we have done is we have just seen or considered a point where your plane meets with the y-axis. We want to see where your plane meets with the x-axis and where your plane meets with the z-axis. Now when you talk about this point here, this is just one point where your plane meets with the x-axis. Now we have to consider the other points with respect to the other frames of references. Now with respect to x-axis, this plane is parallel to that of the x-axis, meaning it will not meet the plane anywhere. So it is easy for we can say that this plane meets the x-axis at infinity. So one way of describing two parallel lines is to say that these parallel lines meet at infinity. So similarly, we can say, since this plane in blue and x-axis are parallel. So this plane will meet x-axis at infinity. And similarly, this plane is parallel to the z-axis or the z principal axis. So we can also say this plane meets the z-axis at infinity. Now the point where this plane meets is 0, 0, 1 by a, and we are talking just about the exact y-axis here. So we have no relevance of x and z-axis here. We want to see the exact point along the y-axis. So instead of having 3 integers, we just need the 1 integer that is relevant to y-axis, because even though this point, using our previous discussion, have 3 terms, we want to consider exclusively the point where this plane meets with respect to the y-axis. So even though by definition this has 3 coordinates, we want to see, or we want to focus our entire discussion just along the y-axis, and therefore we take just this term here. So the reason we consider the overall points, and we choose this here because this point is only relevant when you consider the whole of the system. When you say I want to see where the plane meets the overall frame of the reference, then only then you have to consider this point here. Let me repeat. Only when you want to talk about, the point where the plane intersects the frame of reference as a whole. You have a 3-dimensional frame of reference and you want to see where the plane that you have considered will intersect this whole of the frame of reference, then you express that point in this manner with all the 3 different axes included. However, in this definition, or in this way of, or in the process of describing or representing the plane, we want to separate each of these frames of references individually and see the intercept the desired plane makes with each of these frames of references. So we are separating the whole frame of references into 3, and we want to see what is the intercept that the desired plane makes with the individual frames of references. So individual frames of references, intercept made in the individual frame of references by the desired plane. So in that case, we just consider A, and we have seen that this being parallel, the plane being parallel to x-axis, it means that it makes the intercept at the infinity, and same goes for z-axis. Now, so the plane meets the x-axis at infinity, it meets the y-axis at A, it meets the z-axis at infinity. So this is where the plane meets the frames of reference individually. So it is important to know this is where the frame of reference or the planes meet the frame of references individually. But if you want to take the whole of the frame of reference, then this is where it meets. As a whole, when you consider the whole of the frame of reference, the plane meets the whole of the frame of reference at one point, and this is that point. So it is important for us to differentiate this too. Now, when you talk about the points where the plane meet individually each of these frames of reference, you end up with this points here, infinity, A and infinity. Now you have to take the reciprocal of it according to the way we have described here. So this way we identified the plane of interest meets the frames of reference individually at infinity, A and infinity. Now we want to take the reciprocal of it, so it will be 1 by infinity, 1 by A and 1 by infinity. And ultimately 1 by infinity is nothing but we can treat that as 0, and this will be 1 by A and this will be 0. Now we want to factorize it. The easier way of factorizing is to get rid of this A here. So therefore we can multiply each of these points by A, and you would end up with 1, 0, 1, 0. And this then should represent the plane that we are talking about. And the way to represent a plane when you are writing it down is to use a curved bracket. So now what we have is we have represented this plane using 3 integers and within the curved bracket. So we have 3 integers within a curved bracket representing this plane. These integers are called as Miller indices. And once you see Miller indices, being enclosed by a curved bracket, then it means that we are talking about a plane here. Now let us try to do the same for a different plane that we are interested in. Let's see what that would render us. So again, we will build our frame of reference, and based on that we will build our unit cell. Now we want to see, just to give an idea of how this representing the plane or describing a plane using Miller integers works, we will try another example. Now the plane we are interested in is this one. So here there is a point. This is the plane that we are interested in. So this would be your x-axis, this would be your y-axis, and this would be your z-axis. And I will just highlight the plane that we are interested in blue. So this is the plane that we are interested in. I hope you are able to see. Maybe I will also try to give the outline in red. So this is the plane we are interested in. Now we want to see individually where these planes intersect the unit cell individually in each of the reference frames. So along the x-axis, it meets the x-axis at A, and along the y-axis it meets at A, and along the z-axis it meets at A by 2. So along the x-axis it meets at A, along the y-axis it meets at A, and along the z-axis it meets at A by 2. Now according to our generalized way of representing the plane, we take the reciprocal of these values. So it will be 1 by A, 1 by A, comma 2 by A. Now we want to factorize it, and so that means we can multiply this by A. So ultimately you would end up with 1 comma 2 within the flower brackets. So this would mean that we have represented this plane here using the Miller integers. So this is just an example to show how generally we can express the plane within the unit cell using the 3 different integers that we refer to as the Miller indices. Now let us get back to the plane, that is 0, 1, 0. So this plane we already plotted. It is this plane here. So this is nothing but one of the face of the unit cell, and this is of using Miller integers, this can be represented by 0, 1, 0. Now if you consider this plane, okay, we'll begin with the frames of reference with the origin here. Yeah. So the plane we are interested in is the 0, 1, 0, this plane. Now this is 0, 1, 0. Now the frame of reference, that is are x, y, and z. This is something of our choosing. We chose it according to our own convenience. The reason we chose this x, y, and z is because this is what we used, or this is what we considered when we talked about the components of stresses. So it is also possible that you can change the x here. You can now have a frame of reference wherein the x is here and the y is here and z continues to stay here. In that case, what would be the nomenclature or the way to represent this plane? Now what we are essentially doing is, since assigning a frame of reference for a given unit cell, it is not that we don't have any definite rule for it and we do it according to our convenience. We want to see what happens if you change the frames of reference slightly. So we interchange x and y, and we want to talk about the nomenclature for the same plane or way to describe the same plane here. So in that case, let's see what we get or what Miller integers we get. So if we have x-axis here, y-axis here, and z-axis here, so this we can change because this we chose based on our convenience, and we stick with one frame of reference because the frame of reference that we use for the components or the derivation of components of stresses. But it is possible that suddenly you have a change of mind, you want to change the frames of reference, and let's see how the Miller integers changes for a given plane when you change the frame of reference. Now you have in the x-axis the plane intersecting at point A. So here individually the plane intersects the x-axis here. So the intercept made by the plane along the x-axis is A. It doesn't make any intercept along the y-axis, so it is parallel. So it will meet at infinity, it will make an intercept at infinity, and the same goes for the z-axis. So you have the plane making the intersect along the x-axis at a, y-axis at infinity, and z-axis at infinity. Now we take the reciprocal, so you have 1 by a, 1 by infinity, and 1 by infinity. So ultimately when you normalize this would be, or 1 by infinity is 0, so you would have something like this, and when you factorize it you will have 1 comma 0 comma 0. So 1 comma 0 comma 0, this plane, and 0 1 0 plane, they both mean the same depending on the frame of reference that you choose. The Miller integers changes even though the plane remains the same. The Miller integers changes because we have changed the description for the frames of references. So this is something that can be done with the based on our convenience. So even though based on our convenience or depending on our convenience that Miller integers vary, the value of the Miller integers vary, they both represent the same plane. So these ways of representing or having different Miller integers representing the same plane would ultimately yield you the family of planes, meaning when you have a unit cell, depending on the frame of reference you choose, you can have equivalent planes. So for instance, if you want to plot this 1 0 0 for the x, y and z for our previous plane, so we want to plot this 1 0 0 for our previous consideration. So instead of considering the new frames of reference that is in red, we want to plot 1 0 0 for the old frame of reference. So that means you have to go back, then you have to have 1 will represent 0 and 1 will represent a, and 0 will represent infinity and infinity, and this would mean this plane for the old frame of reference. So the new frame of reference 1 0 0 means the frame the plane that we have previously considered. For the old frame of reference, this indices means this plane here. So these two are equivalent planes. So these two are equivalent planes, and the indices for these planes vary based on frames of reference or principal axis. So when you have a definite plane being represented by different frames of references or different principal axes, or to put it the other way, when you can represent different planes by having or changing the frames of references using the same indices, then you have equivalent planes. So you have a single set of indices, for the instance this indices, so you stick with this indices, and then by changing the frames of reference, by changing the frame of reference, by altering the frame of reference, by moving or by sometimes setting z here, so by changing the frame of reference, you are able to calculate what these indices or what these particular Miller integers correspond to, which plane these Miller integers correspond to, and those planes are equivalent planes, and they are often referred to as the family of planes. So you begin with a definite Miller integers that are within the curved bracket. You fix with this Miller integers. Now you play around with the frame of reference. You keep changing the frame of reference, and then you identify what are the planes correspond to this particular set of Miller integers when you change the frame of references. And then you see these frames of reference or these planes are equivalent, and you refer to that planes as the family of planes. So the family of planes here, the way we can define the family of planes is nothing but they are equivalent planes. So they are equivalent planes, and you can arrive at any of these planes. So you can describe any of these planes within the family of planes. You can describe any of these planes within the family of planes by a same form of Miller integers and varying the frames of reference. So now we saw these two form a family of planes, that is 0 1 0 and 1 0 0. Even though these two are two different planes for a given frame of reference, these two indices, they represent two different planes for a given frame of reference. You can stick with this alone, like we have done. You can stick with this alone, and by changing the frame of reference, you can talk about these two planes, and that is what we refer to as the equivalent planes. So you can fix one values of the Miller integers, and you can play around with the frame of reference, and you can talk about all the equivalent planes within the unit cell. And these equivalent planes are referred to as the family of planes, and these are represented by a flower bracket. So what we have talked about is the family of planes that belongs to 0, 1, 0 Miller integers. So you can stick with this Miller integers, talk about different planes that are possible by changing the frame of reference, and all the planes that are possible within the unit cell by changing the frame of reference. All those planes are referred to, are equivalent in nature, and they are called as the family of planes. So one other aspect of the unit cell we want to talk about is the direction. So we will begin with the next lecture by talking about how to express the direction. So far what we have seen is, we have talked about what a unit cell is, we have talked about how to describe a point within the unit cell, and we have talked about how to represent a plane within the unit cell. Most importantly, we saw there are equivalent planes within the unit cell. How we can identify the equivalent plane is by fixing up the Miller integers and by playing around with the frame of reference, and all the possible planes that you can arrive at by fixing the Miller integers and changing the frames of reference are equivalent in nature, and these are referred to as the family of planes, and these family of planes are represented using the flower bracket here. So the reason we are revisiting these concepts, because we know, or we have an understanding that the stress varies with the plane and the direction, and correspondingly the behavior of the material or change in the arrangement of the atoms will also change with respect to the planes, and that is the reason why we are taking time to revisit this concept. So in the next lecture we will begin by considering how to describe the direction within the unit cell. So let us see ourselves in the next lecture. Goodbye.